Imagine a city where the knowledge of all ancient civilizations was gathered as if it were a single, living entity. A place where Egyptian papyri, Greek treatises, Eastern wisdoms, and Hebrew writings rested side by side, revealing the deepest secrets of the universe, the soul, and the divine. This city was Alexandria. But behind its cultural and intellectual glory, there was something even more enigmatic. A hidden gospel, a codex that, according to rumors, spoke of a different Christ, a Christ not bound to flesh, but universal, eternal, present in everything. A cosmic Christ. This manuscript, supposedly hidden among the scrolls and volumes of the Library of Alexandria, disappeared without a trace. Or was it intentionally concealed? The question that has echoed since then is, why would this text be so dangerous that it needed to be silenced forever? The Library of Alexandria was more than a book repository. It was the pulsating heart of human knowledge, built with the intent to gather all known wisdom of the earth. Founded in the 3rd century BC, under the reign of Ptolemy I, it housed hundreds of thousands of documents, many of which did not survive time or were deliberately destroyed. There, the mysteries of alchemy, Chaldean astronomy, Egyptian medicine, Eastern esoteric traditions, and the earliest writings on the Logos, a concept that would later be associated with Christ in the deepest doctrines of early Christianity, could be found. For centuries, Alexandria was the meeting point between reason and faith, between science and spirit. But with so much power condensed in one place, it was to be expected that opposing forces would rise to control or eradicate what could not be understood or manipulated. Among the scholars and initiates frequenting the library, there were persistent rumors about a set of very ancient writings, guarded by a Gnostic sect that saw Jesus not as a literal savior, but as a symbol of the inner light present in everyone. This gospel was unlike anything known. It did not narrate external miracles or historical events, but spoke of a Christ who came not just to redeem sins, but to awaken humanity's dormant consciousness. This text, known in secret circles as the Codex of Alexandria, was said to contain teachings linking Christ to the mechanics of the universe, the cycle of the stars, the soul as part of the cosmos. The idea of a cosmic Christ threatened the forming religious structures as it took power away from institutions and placed the divine within the individual. The disappearance of the library, or more precisely its slow and calculated destruction over centuries, is shrouded in controversy. Fires, looting, political and religious disputes gradually consumed what may have been humanity's greatest intellectual treasure. Among the silent victims of this erasure was the so-called codex. The curious thing is that, even with the destruction, certain symbolic fragments began to appear elsewhere. Apocryphal writings, discovered in Nag Hammadi in the 20th century, contain passages that resemble the supposed Gospel of Alexandria. Phrases like, "The kingdom is within you and outside of you," and "When you know yourselves, you will be known," point to a common root of inner, non-dogmatic, deeply transformative teaching. This raised the hypothesis that the codex was not completely lost, but its fragments were scattered, encrypted in other traditions, waiting for the right time to be rediscovered. Many scholars avoid touching on this topic for fear of becoming targets of academic ridicule or ideological persecution. But there are those who continue to investigate. In the Vatican's secret archives, there are records of documents recovered from Alexandria, kept under surveillance for containing dangerous heresies. Among these texts, some speak of a Jesus who teaches not through external parables, but through direct experiences of consciousness expansion. He does not demand worship, but self-reflection. He does not save, but awakens. He is not unique, but a manifestation of a consciousness that everyone can achieve. The Codex of Alexandria would therefore be not a book about religion, but about enlightenment, and this is precisely why it was covered up. Compared to the canonical Gospels we know today, the lost Gospel of Alexandria seemed to have no interest in forming an institutional religion. It did not speak of original sin, it did not threaten with hell, nor did it demand sacrifices. On the contrary, it stated that everything we seek is already within us. The connection with the divine does not depend on intermediaries, temples, dogmas, or hierarchies. This, in itself, was a direct threat to any system based on the spiritual and psychological control of the masses. The destruction of the library was not just a historical tragedy. It was also a carefully orchestrated operation to silence voices that could liberate. The depth of the possible content of the codex challenges even modern notions of spirituality. It would connect the figure of Christ to the very fabric of reality, as a cosmic intelligence present at all levels of existence. Such a concept is not alien to Eastern traditions like Vedanta or Taoism, which see the divine as something immanent, not distant. The fusion of these concepts in the heart of Alexandria could have given rise to a revolutionary spiritual synthesis, but this union was sabotaged, fragmented, hidden. The cosmic Christ, then, was not denied, he was dispersed. Despite all the effort to erase the lost gospel, its essence survived in the subtext of other texts, in symbols, in esoteric traditions, in the teachings of mystics. Like a flame that withstands the wind, the message that the divine resides in every human being continues to awaken hearts, even without a name or holy book to sustain it. Perhaps the codex was physically destroyed, but the idea it carried remains alive in the collective unconscious of humanity, waiting to be recognized. And there are those who claim to have had access to visions, channelings, or insights that trace back to the content of this gospel. Symbolic descriptions of a Christ who floats between dimensions, who teaches through vibration, who leads not to blind faith, but to spiritual lucidity, emerge in mystical accounts at various times. The unsettling question remains: what if this gospel were not just a historical document, but a spiritual frequency? And what if it could be accessed not by archaeologists, but by sincere seekers in elevated states of consciousness? The simple concept of a cosmic Christ already breaks religious and cultural boundaries. He does not belong to a church, a people, or a book. He is a living archetype of supreme achievement, of impersonal love, of timeless wisdom. The lost gospel, in this sense, is not just a set of missing pages. It's a proposal for an internal revolution. It challenges us to question everything we've been taught, to abandon the safety of passive belief, and to dive into the fertile uncertainty of inner search. The silence surrounding the Codex of Alexandria is not just historical. It's a sacred silence, dense, laden with meaning. Something was concealed, not because it was a lie, but because it was too much truth. The truth sets you free, but it also destabilizes. That's why every civilization that sought power above consciousness feared this truth. And today, as we revisit this possibility, we have the chance to reopen this portal. The gospel of the cosmic Christ may no longer be on the shelves of ancient Alexandria, but it may be closer than we think, within us, waiting for the moment when the veil of illusion falls and we can finally remember who we truly are. Long before being associated with crosses, temples, and dogmas, Christ was understood by certain ancient schools as an archetypal manifestation of a universal consciousness, an emanation from the cosmos itself, an eternal principle that existed long before the historical incarnation of Jesus. This understanding was preserved by Gnostic, Hermetic, and philosophical currents that never saw the figure of Christ as the exclusive property of a tradition or historical event. For these thinkers and mystics, Christ was a cosmic presence, prior to time and beyond matter, something that dwells in every human being as a spark of eternity waiting to be awakened. The story that has come down to us, simplified and controlled, is merely the outer shell of a much broader and transformative teaching, a story veiled by centuries of omission, persecution, and reinterpretation. The vision of the cosmic Christ, unlike the biographical Jesus, understands incarnation as a symbol, not as the main event. Jesus, in this perspective, was a unique manifestation, an avatar of this eternal principle, but not the only one. He was like a mirror, pointing to the dormant potential in all human beings. This does not diminish his importance. On the contrary, he becomes even grander, as he represents the possibility of transcendence accessible to everyone. This idea, however, was not well received by religious structures that needed an exclusive savior, a linear narrative, and a central figure to be worshipped. The cosmic Christ, being impersonal and inclusive, took control away from the institution and placed the divine in the heart of each individual. It is at this point that the deep conflict between esoteric Christianity and literalist Christianity arises. While the latter demanded belief, hierarchy, and external rituals, the former taught self-knowledge, introspection, and direct communion with the divine. The Gnostics, for example, saw Christ as the Logos, the cosmic mind, the divine wisdom that permeates all things. The Logos was not a name, but a vibration, an intelligence that crosses time, matter, and spirit. It was this Christ who guided the human soul in the crossing from the world of illusion to the world of truth. And it was this crossing that the lost Gospel of Alexandria described with symbolic depth, revealing Christ not as a judge, but as a guide for the soul. Gnostic traditions still record the presence of Mary Magdalene as one of Jesus's most intimate disciples, bearer of a hidden knowledge that was deliberately ignored by the official Gospels. She was not just a witness, but an initiate. In various texts, she is portrayed as someone who understood the cosmic Christ more deeply than the apostles themselves. Her marginalization in the canonical texts reveals not only a patriarchal bias, but also the fear that ecclesiastical power had of the esoteric wisdom she represented. In the Gospel of Philip, for example, it is said that Jesus often kissed her on the mouth, a symbol not of romance, but of spiritual transmission. Mary represented the awakened feminine, the soul receptive to cosmic light, and this completely destabilized the masculine and hierarchical structure of the forming church. As we delve into the roots of this teaching, we find striking parallels between the cosmic Christ and other spiritual figures around the world. Krishna in Hinduism is also described as an incarnation of the divine who comes into the world to restore order and teach about the eternal soul. Mithra, worshipped in the Roman Empire before Christianity, was a solar being, born on December 25th, with disciples who performed miracles and returned to eternity. Horus, in Egypt, carried with him the symbols of resurrection and the fight against the forces of darkness. These similarities are not a coincidence. They point to a deeper truth. The cosmic Christ is an archetype that manifests in different cultures, at different times, under different names, but with the same essence: to awaken the soul from its material prison. This universality was precisely what made the lost gospel so dangerous to the builders of official Christianity. If Christ were understood as a cosmic presence accessible to all, there would be no need for temples, priests, or dogmatic control. Power would decentralize. The very idea of hell, original sin, and guilt would lose their foundation. The spiritual journey would no longer be obedience to external commandments, but an internal transformation. The cosmic Christ does not demand submission, but courage. He does not reward the faithful, but those who awaken. And this difference is the central point of the entire conflict between the forgotten Gospels and the accepted ones. While the official texts tell the story of a man who came to die for our sins, the alternative texts, including fragments attributed to the Codex of Alexandria, speak of a master who came to remind us of who we truly are. Salvation, therefore, is not in accepting a doctrine, but in remembering a forgotten truth. And this truth is simple: we are part of the divine. This statement, which seems abstract at first glance, carries profound implications. It means that the separation between creator and creature is an illusion. It means that the most sacred temple is the awakened consciousness. It means that Christ is not in heaven, but in the silence of the heart. The fear of this revelation was so great that many who dared to teach it were persecuted, silenced, or killed. For centuries, Gnostic thought was declared heresy, its works burned, its leaders hunted. But despite all this effort, the idea never disappeared. It survived as an underground current, flowing through occult schools, initiatory orders, mystical traditions, works of art, and cryptic poems. The cosmic Christ became a whisper among seekers, a symbol of the possibility of transcendence, a silent call that spans the ages. And today, it re-emerges with strength, as the collective consciousness of humanity begins to open up to a spirituality that does not divide, but unites. The untold story of the cosmic Christ is also our own story. It is the narrative of the soul that has forgotten itself and is now beginning to remember. It is the eternal myth of light incarnating into matter to transform darkness into wisdom. It is the journey of the ordinary human being towards the extraordinary, and this path does not begin with dogmas, but with questions. It is not traversed with blind faith, but with open eyes, and it does not end with promises of salvation, but with the recognition that the kingdom of heaven is within us. If we understand Christ not as a name, but as a frequency, we will realize that he has always been present in all traditions that point to the truth. And if we dare to follow this frequency within us, we can rediscover the lost gospel, not in books, but in the direct experience with the mystery of existence. The cosmic Christ is more than an idea. It is a call to awaken the divine spark that dwells within the human being. What the Gospel of Alexandria essentially stated was that liberation would not come from outside, neither through figures nor formulas, but through the awakening of the eternal truth that silently lives in every sincere heart. It did not ask for worship, it asked for transformation, and this made it dangerous, because those who awaken become free, and those who are free can no longer be manipulated. Alexandria, a mythical city founded by Alexander the Great, was not just an intersection of empires, trade routes, and cultural influences. It was a spiritual convergence point, a kind of Earth's chakra, where ancient wisdom currents flowed, intertwined, and gave rise to something completely new. Strategically located between Egypt, the Greco-Roman world, and the East, Alexandria became a spiritual womb of the planet, where ideas, symbols, and religious traditions not only coexisted, but merged into surprising syntheses. The library that flourished there was merely the visible face of a larger and more subtle organism, a vibrational network of masters, scribes, initiates, and seekers who saw diversity as the key to unity. In this fertile ground, spirituality was not a doctrine, but an experience. It was not confined to dogmas, but flourished in living symbols. And it was in this mystical cauldron that the vision of a cosmic Christ was born, preceding religion, subsequent to matter, present in all things. The city breathed mystery. The Egyptian sages there preserved secrets of the soul, inherited from millennia. The Greek philosophers, heirs of Plato and Pythagoras, taught that the visible world was merely a shadow of a higher reality. The Alexandrian Jews, like Philo, sought to unite the Torah with reason, and the early Christians, many of them still Gnostics, saw in Christ not a political Messiah, but the eternal Logos, the pure emanation of divine intelligence. Alexandria not only allowed these encounters, but celebrated them. There, Egyptian rituals crossed paths with Hindu meditations, Platonic discussions with Chaldean esoteric practices. It was as if the entire city conspired to reveal that the divine is not a monopoly of a belief, but the vibrant essence of all true wisdom. And precisely because of this, everything there became dangerous for those seeking control. Philo of Alexandria, one of the great thinkers of the city, wrote about the Logos even before the Gospel of John mentioned that, "In the beginning was the Word." For Philo, this Logos was a bridge between the material world and the divine world, the living intelligence that permeates everything and through which human beings can unite with the One. It is virtually impossible not to see in these words the embryo of the idea of the cosmic Christ. And if the texts attributed to the lost codex of Alexandria really existed, as many alternative scholars believe, then it is likely that this spiritual fusion was recorded there, where Jesus was not just one master among others, but the symbolic incarnation of the Logos in its purest and most accessible form. The codex, therefore, would not be heresy. It would be the final revelation, the divine in flesh, not to be worshipped, but to be mirrored. The mystery schools of Alexandria were silent temples where knowledge was not transmitted through reading, but through initiation. The Egyptian rituals practiced there were not theater, but symbolic keys that induced altered states of consciousness, visionary experiences, and archetypal perceptions of the higher self. Many of the initiates who would later become significant figures in early Christianity went through these schools. They learned that myths are maps, not facts, that gods are parts of the psyche, not characters in the sky, that Christ, in this context, is the eternal Son, the one that is born in us after the plunge into the dark night of the soul, These truths, though profound, were not of interest to the Roman Empire, which needed an external, political, standardized Christ, useful for the imperial unification project. The inner Christ liberates, the institutional Christ subjugates. With the rise of Christianity as the official religion of Rome, Alexandria went from being the cradle of enlightenment to a target of suppression. The burning of the library, although shrouded in mysteries and contradictory versions, was not an isolated incident, but part of a wave of repression aimed at eradicating any form of spirituality that could not be codified, censored, and controlled. Entire books disappeared, sacred manuscripts were destroyed or hidden, masters were persecuted, killed, or silenced. Alexandria bled, but before that, it left seeds that germinated in other lands, other languages, other traditions. The essence of the city did not die. It merely became invisible. In the heart of the lost library, it is believed that there was a secret wing, accessed only by initiates, where the most sacred texts were kept, including the supposed Codex of Alexandria. This manuscript, according to scattered reports from Arabic sources and later Hermetic accounts, was not an ordinary book. It did not narrate the life of Jesus as a biography, but as a cosmic symbol. There were no genealogies, physical miracles, or linear sermons. There were images, archetypes, coded languages that pointed to an inner initiation. It was a map of the soul, not of history, an invitation to die to the ego and be reborn as consciousness. This gospel did not promise paradise after death. It stated that the kingdom of heaven is in a latent state within the human being, waiting to be awakened now. The Codex was not isolated. Many other texts were circulating in Alexandria with similar messages. The Gospel of Thomas, of Mary, of Philip, the Pistis Sophia, the hymns of Valentinus, all of them pointed in the same direction. Self-knowledge as the gateway to the divine. And even if these texts were marginalized or destroyed, their influence spread. Alexandrian spirituality did not depend on a single text, but on a collective vibration, on wisdom shared among those who felt the call of the invisible. The language was symbolic. The teachings circulated mouth to mouth among those who knew how to listen with the heart. It was a living network which could not be destroyed simply with fire or decrees. The figure of the cosmic Christ, shaped in Alexandria, was a mirror of the awakened being. He did not demand worship, but presence. He did not ask to be followed, but for individuals to delve into themselves. He was not the end of the spiritual journey, but the beginning of an inner voyage that each one must undertake for themselves. This idea transformed the average seeker into an initiate, and this was, for religious and political powers, unbearable. Spiritual control is based on the promise of an external truth, on the mediation between God and man. But the cosmic Christ abolished this mediation. He was the living bridge between the human and the divine, and anyone could cross it, without permission. The silence that enveloped Alexandria after its destruction was not merely the end of an era. It was the beginning of a cycle of forced oblivion, an attempt to extinguish the fire that burned in awakened consciences. But there are things that time cannot erase. Spiritual truth, when understood at its core, transcends paper, temple, and dogma. It becomes a seed, and silent seeds germinated in deserts, mountains, and souls. The cosmic Christ, erased from libraries, continued to be chanted in the hearts of mystics, in the dreams of seekers, in the secret songs of the initiated. Alexandria may have been destroyed, but its message continues to echo, calling those who hear beyond words. When we look at Alexandria today, shrouded in ruins and dust, we might be deceived by its appearance. But there's another Alexandria, invisible, vibrant, alive, that pulses within every soul seeking truth beyond forms. This spiritual Alexandria is the true cradle of the cosmic Christ, and the lost gospel, so sought after among archives, may be alive within each of us, waiting to be read with the eyes of the soul. The city has been silenced, but its voice still speaks, not with words, but with presence, not with dogmas, but with light. And this light, no one will ever be able to extinguish. No matter how much history has tried to erase, no matter how much time has corroded the papyri, burned the libraries, and silenced those who dared to speak, certain echoes cannot be suppressed. They traverse the centuries as persistent whispers, murmuring among ruins, hidden in the between lines of denied texts, camouflaged in reinterpreted liturgies, disguised in the chants of those who still remember, even without knowing from where. The forbidden gospel, supposedly contained in the Codex of Alexandria, was never fully recovered, but its phrases resurface as fragments of scattered memory. The kingdom is within and outside of you. If you know yourselves, you will be known. The light you seek already shines within you. Such statements, simple in form, explode in depth when understood in their Gnostic and initiatory origin. They are invitations to awakening, not conversion. They are internal maps, not moral codes. They are reminders that the true master does not inhabit the altar, but the silence. This gospel spoke of a Christ who did not come to be crowned, but to be revealed. Revealed not in the external world, but in the secret chamber of consciousness. He did not promise salvation after death, but taught how to die to illusion and be reborn into truth within this life. His teachings did not align with the priestly structure. On the contrary, he challenged any power that tried to place itself between the human soul and the divine. For the Gnostics, Christ was the spark that sleeps in every being, the living logos that pulses at the core of existence. This spark is eternal, untouchable, but obscured by the illusory world of matter and ignorance. The Seeker's mission is to awaken this light, and this was the role of the cosmic Christ, not to redeem sins, but to ignite consciousness. While the canonical Gospels structured linear narratives, with genealogies, miracles, and crucifixion, the apocryphal Gospels delved into symbolism, layers of meaning, and spiritual metaphors. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, composed entirely of sayings attributed to Jesus, presents a master who does not answer but provokes, who does not lead but invites. In it, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you. If you do not bring it forth, it will destroy you." Here, salvation and damnation are not external impositions, but internal consequences. This is the same spirit that permeated the Codex of Alexandria, a radical call to introspection, to self-inquiry, to the remembrance of the divine origin of the soul. This spiritual approach shifted the axis of power from the institution and placed it in direct experience. There was no need to interpret scriptures, one needed to become a living scripture. It was not necessary to believe in dogmas, it was essential to experience the truth itself. This made any religious authority unnecessary, and what is more dangerous to a control structure than losing its monopoly over the divine? For this reason, these texts were labeled as heretical. They were hunted, hidden, burned. But as if by a sacred irony, many survived. Buried in the desert, forgotten in caves, preserved by hands that understood the value of what was not yet allowed to be read. When the Nag Hammadi manuscripts were discovered in 1945, the world experienced a burst of spiritual revelations that had long been buried. There were texts attributed to Thomas, Mary, Philip, James, along with Gnostic treatises such as the Hypostasis of the Archons, the Secret Book of John, the Pistis Sophia, and even though the Codex of Alexandria itself was not found, the parallels are striking. The ideas these texts bring, Christ as an internal principle, divinity as a direct experience, the illusion of the material world, the journey of the soul in search of gnosis, are deeply aligned with what alternative scholars attribute to the lost gospel of the library. There is no definitive proof, but there are too many synchronicities to be ignored. The language of these Gospels is deliberately symbolic. They are not concerned with historical records. They are focused on inner transformation. They speak of lights, layers of heaven, veils, archons, emanations, crossings. Each image is a gateway to an archetypal reality, and this is where the Codex of Alexandria stands out. According to esoteric accounts, it would have been written in a labyrinthine structure, with phrases that changed in meaning depending on the reader's state of consciousness. It could not be understood by dormant minds. It was a mirror that only reflected the truth of those who dared to strip away their illusions. The text did not teach, it revealed. and the revelation only occurred when the reader was ready to remember. The figure of Christ in these texts is profoundly different from the caricature constructed by popular religiosity. He is not passive nor suffering. He is a master of wisdom, knower of hidden realities, transmitter of gnosis, challenger of the archons, the forces that keep the soul imprisoned in the world of matter and forgetfulness. He teaches that liberation is in remembrance, that suffering is not punishment, but a path, that the cross is not a symbol of pain, but of transmutation. He did not come to found a religion, but to tear the veil of illusion. And it is precisely for this reason that this Christ could not be accepted by institutions. He was too free, too profound, too human. This vision also resurfaces in Eastern traditions. The concept of Atman in Vedanta, of Buddha nature in Buddhism, or even of Tao in Taoism, all point to an inner divine spark, a nameless essence, a point of unity between the self and the cosmos. The cosmic Christ aligns with these ideas with almost millimetric precision. He is the Western response to the same universal call, awakening. And in this sense, the lost Gospel of Alexandria would not just be an alternative Christian text, but a bridge between traditions, a point of convergence between the paths of the East and the West, between faith and reason, between myth and direct experience. In some Hermetic traditions that survived the fall of Alexandria, there are quotes attributed to the codex, phrases that appear nowhere else but resonate with a strangely familiar power. Do not seek outside what pulses in you like a star. The flesh is a veil, the spirit, a home. The name that saves is the silence where he dwells. Each of these phrases is a door that opens inward. They do not demand interpretation. They require presence. They do not ask for belief. They ask for surrender. Yes, they are fragments, but fragments of a larger memory. The memory that we were created not to follow, but to awaken, not to believe, but to be. Many who read these texts today feel something strange. It's not an intellectual understanding, but an intimate recognition, as if something dormant was touched, as if each word activated a forgotten memory. This is gnosis, not an acquired knowledge, but a remembered knowledge. The forbidden gospel works like a mirror of the soul. It doesn't teach you what you are. It makes you remember what you have never ceased to be. And that's its power. That's why it was hidden. That's why it was denied. That's why it still scares. This gospel has no temple. It has no altar. It dwells in silent meditation, in the deep sigh, in the encounter with the real self. It does not condemn, does not divide, does not threaten. It welcomes, unifies, invites. It does not demand penance. It invites to return. It is not a map to heaven. It is a mirror to the divine. And the Christ it presents is not an external savior, but the very light that shines in every being. An inner sun, waiting for the end of the night to radiate. The history of human spirituality is largely the history of a silent battle between revelation and repression, between pursuit and obedience, between light and power. The lost gospel that spoke of the cosmic Christ was one of the first targets of this war, not because it was false, but precisely because it was too true. It did not bend to control structures. It did not serve empires. It did not feed hierarchies. It was a direct call to inner freedom, to awakened consciousness, to the living gnosis that makes a human being sovereign of their own spiritual existence. Therefore, its existence was denied, its memory erased, its bearers persecuted. The destruction of the Codex of Alexandria and the systematic repression of Gnostic knowledge were not isolated acts, but part of a meticulously architected strategy to suppress a silent revolution, the revolution of the liberated spirit. When Christianity shifted from an organic spiritual movement to a tool of state power, the transformation was brutal. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD marked the beginning of this turn. There, not only was the nature of Christ decided, but also what could or could not be said about him. The diversity of gospels, visions, and interpretations that flourished in the early Christian communities was narrowed down to a single narrative, accepted and imposed by the imperial authority. Christ was officially sanctioned, and with that, anything that did not fit into this new orthodoxy was deemed heresy. Not for lack of spiritual value, but due to its incompatibility with the centralization of power project, the cosmic Christ, being universal, became uncontrollable, and power does not tolerate what it cannot control. From this point on, a true crusade against knowledge began. Books were hunted down, libraries closed, schools destroyed. The Gnostics, who preserved the inner gospel, were pursued with fury. Their communities were dismantled, their texts condemned to fire. What had been spiritual flourishing turned into shadow and fear. The inquisitors of faith not only condemned divergent doctrines, but also destroyed the means by which freedom of thought could survive. And the most tragic thing is that, by destroying spiritual diversity, the bridge between traditions was also destroyed. Alexandria ceased to be a symbol of synthesis to become a memory of loss. The censorship was not only religious, it was also philosophical, scientific, symbolic. Everything that did not fit into the new dogmatic view was silenced. Texts that spoke of the soul as part of the whole, of reality as an emanation of the spirit, of Christ as a universal archetypal principle, all of these were systematically eliminated. The few that escaped were hidden, buried, sealed. Those who protected them did so in secret, risking their lives for something they knew was not just paper and ink, but a living truth. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria was an extreme symbol of this war. It wasn't just books that were burned, but futures. The possibility for humans to remember their sacred origin was set aflame. During the Middle Ages, repression became even more intense. The Inquisition institutionalized the hunt for ideas. Any group that dared to revive ancient teachings, such as the Cathars, the Albigenses, or even the Templars in certain esoteric aspects, was brutally eliminated. The Cathars, for example, spoke of an inner Christ who liberated the soul through the light of knowledge, not obedience. They did not recognize the authority of the Church as necessary for salvation, and for this, they were massacred in the name of faith. These events were not deviations. They were systematic policies of annihilation of the free spirit. Censorship became a ritual, and ignorance, an imposed sacrament. At the same time, the authorities began to replace profound meanings with literal interpretations. The symbolism of the inner Christ was converted into external idolatry. The myth was read as history, and history was sanctified as the only truth. Initiation metaphors turned into unquestionable dogmas. What should have been lived became merely recited, and so the forbidden gospel was not only removed from the shelves, but also replaced in its symbols. The cross, formerly a symbol of transmutation, became an object of suffering. The bread and wine, which represented an integrated body and spirit, were transformed into dogmas of literal presence. The sacred was hijacked. Fear has become a tool of control. Hell has been used as a threat, sin as an eternal mark, salvation as currency, and Christ, a figure of inner liberation, was transformed into an intermediary between God and man, denying what the ancient Gospels insisted, that there is no separation, that unity is already real, that the divine dwells in the heart of man. This was the greatest theft in the spiritual history of humanity, taking away the soul's right to remember itself as part of the whole. The lost Gospel of Alexandria was not just forbidden, it was rewritten by hands interested in domination, not enlightenment. Meanwhile, in secret places, the silent resistance persisted. Isolated monasteries, esoteric schools, initiatory traditions preserved fragments of this wisdom. Hermeticism, alchemy, Sufism, Kabbalah, all these paths kept the spark of Gnosis alive. And even though they used different languages, they spoke of the same reality. Christ as awakened consciousness, salvation as expansion, suffering as purification, the world as a mirror of the soul. This secret network of seekers never ceased to exist, and it echoed, in a murmur, the essence of the forbidden gospel. With each generation, someone was born who connected with this vibration, someone who remembered, even without ever having read. In more recent times, access to this knowledge has begun to return. The Vatican's secret archives, still closed to the public, are the target of theories and investigations. Many scholars assert that part of the documents rescued from Alexandria and other Gnostic sources are hidden there, far from the eyes of the world. guarding secrets that could redefine not only religion, but our very perception of reality. The very existence of these archives is already a testament to what is being hidden. If there were no truth to be feared, there would be no reason to hide what is called a myth. But the myth, when true, is more dangerous than any fact. It awakens. The manipulation of humanity's spiritual history cannot be seen as an accident. It was calculated, and like all manipulation, it came at a cost. Millions were deprived of the right to know their true nature. Entire lives were lived under fear, guilt, shame, carrying crosses that did not belong to them. And even today, many seek the divine outside, not knowing that the temple has always been their own heart. That's why recovering the forbidden gospel is not an archaeological act. It's a revolutionary act. It's a gesture of collective healing. It's consciously rewriting what was distorted with interest. The Codex of Alexandria may not physically be among us, but its spirit is present in every longing for truth, in every quest for light, in every refusal to accept imposed spirituality. Each time someone turns inward in silence and asks, "Who am I?" they are tuning into the same frequencies that the gospel touched. Each time someone abandons fear to walk with truth, they are writing new pages of that codex. Censorship may have destroyed the books, but it never destroyed the living memory that pulses in every awakened soul. The deepest essence of the cosmic Christ is not revealed in words, on altars, or in theories. It manifests in the direct experience of inner transmutation. This experience does not belong to any religion, is not tied to scriptures, and is not the monopoly of a culture. It is universal, timeless, and absolutely alive. And it was precisely this truth that the Codex of Alexandria would have revealed with clarity and boldness. The cosmic Christ, as described in the surviving fragments and in the Gnostic currents derived from that knowledge, was not just a master or a symbolic figure. He was the very intelligence of the universe in action within human consciousness. He was the spark of the source, the presence of the whole in every part, the inner sun that shines beyond the illusion of fleeting identity. This Christ is not worshipped. He is embodied, not as an external character, but as awakened consciousness. The alchemy of consciousness is the process through which this latent presence is recognized, activated, and expanded. It is described in symbolic language, in various spiritual, philosophical, and even scientific traditions. The cosmic Christ represents the ultimate stage of this transmutation, the definitive union between the lower self and the higher self, between the human and the divine, between matter and spirit. And it is at this point that the message of the lost gospel of Alexandria becomes revolutionary. It did not teach beliefs, but practices. It did not speak of future rewards, but of the symbolic death of the ego and the rebirth of consciousness. This is the core of spiritual alchemy, the great work, the magnum opus, and it takes place within the human psyche itself, not outside of it. The alchemical path is composed of phases, all painful, intense, and sacred. The first is the nigredo, the dark night of the soul, the collapse of certainties, the crumbling of the false self. It's when the seeker realizes that all inherited truths are fragile and that the identity built over a lifetime is just a conditioned reflection. This internal collapse, as painful as it may be, is necessary to make room for the real. The cosmic Christ does not appear as an external light, but as clarity that emerges after the dissolution of internal shadows. He is born in the silence that remains after everything crumbles. And it is in this silence that transformation begins, not with promises, but with presence. The second phase of alchemy is the albedo, the whitening. Here, consciousness begins to expand. The seeker sees beyond the veils. Dualities start to integrate. Good and evil cease to be external absolutes and are understood as complementary aspects within one's own consciousness. The cosmic Christ at this point is no longer just an ideal, it is experienced as direct perception, as a state of being. Compassion springs forth effortlessly. Fear begins to disappear. Love ceases to be an emotion and becomes a creative force. It's not about believing in Christ, but recognizing oneself as an extension of the Christ consciousness, not out of pride, but out of awakening. The third phase is the rubedo, the reddening, the mystical marriage, the ultimate alchemical union between opposites. Here, the ego no longer has dominion, the identity dissolves, but not into annihilation. It transforms into a channel for the divine. The being becomes an instrument of the greater consciousness. The cosmic Christ ceases to be a concept and becomes an embodied reality. He acts, speaks, and loves through the awakened being. He is not separate, not a figure of the past or from the heavens. He is present, here and now, in the heart of the one who has completely surrendered to the process of gnosis. This is the stage where the awakened soul realizes that it was never separate, that the search was merely a return to what always was. The Lost Gospel, attributed to the Codex of Alexandria, spoke of these phases in symbolic language, not with technical instructions, but with images, parables, and archetypal revelations that guided the initiated reader through this internal process. There are scattered records, in fragments linked to this codex, of expressions such as, "He who crosses the desert of himself finds the sun that does not burn, but heals," or even, "He who dies in the flesh of the world lives in the light of the Spirit." These are clear metaphors of the alchemy of consciousness, which requires total surrender, deep trust, and willingness to lose everything that is not true. The gospel was not a book to be memorized, it was a mirror to be traversed. The figure of Christ as a divine alchemist appears in various occult and mystical traditions. He is described as the one who transmuted lead into gold, not in the literal sense, but as a symbol of the process of inner enlightenment. The lead is the ego, dense, limited, reactive. The gold is the awakened spirit, radiant, unchanging. The cosmic Christ performs this transmutation not with magical formulas, but with the truth of being. He leads the disciple from ignorance to wisdom, from fear to presence, from death to eternity. This process, described in an occult way in forbidden texts, is the true initiation. There are no formulas. There is surrender. There is no belief. There is experience. The alchemy of consciousness is, above all, a journey of radical honesty. One must look into the shadow without fear. It is necessary to confront the layers of lies built over a lifetime. It is inevitable to lose what one thought they were, and it is at this point that many give up. The forbidden gospel is not for the weak. It does not offer easy comfort, nor ready-made miracles. It demands courage. It demands the death of the illusory self, and for this reason, it was rejected. Because the world preferred a comfortable religion over real transformation. But those who dare to dive into this process discover a freedom that no authority can grant and no system can take away. When we understand Christ as consciousness and not as a person, everything changes. The cross ceases to be an instrument of punishment and becomes a symbol of passage. The virgin birth becomes a metaphor for the spontaneous awakening of the inner light. The resurrection is not a physical event, but the emergence of a new being after the symbolic death of the old one. The cosmic Christ did not come to establish temples, but to dispel illusions. He did not come to create followers, but to activate dormant gods. He is the fusion point between the human and the infinite. And this fusion occurs in the furnace of experience, not in books or sermons. The alchemical tradition speaks of the philosopher's stone, the one that transforms everything it touches. The cosmic Christ is this stone, but it is not outside. It is the hidden substance within the very self. The Lost Gospel of Alexandria, according to preserved echoes, said that the stone the builders rejected will become the cornerstone of all light. This is not just a poetic quote. It is a profound revelation. The rejected stone is the awakened consciousness, ignored by a world that worships forms but fears the essence. And it will be the foundation of a new era, not of beliefs, but of human beings transfigured by the truth that never dies. The process of transmutation is cyclical. There is no definitive arrival. The cosmic Christ is not an end point, but an infinite spiral of expansion. Each revelation brings new humility. Each death brings new rebirth. The alchemy of consciousness is the path back to the origin, but with new eyes. It is to remember what was forgotten, but with spiritual maturity. And the lost gospel was not a doctrine, but a key, a vibrational password that activated this process in the depths of those who read with an open heart. That's why it was secret. That's why it was sacred. At the end of this alchemical journey, there is not a new me. There is silence, pure presence, the stillness of the being that recognized its eternity. The cosmic Christ does not speak, he vibrates. He does not impose, he invites. He does not save, he reminds. He reminds the human being that they have never been separated, that they are the living emanation of the divine, that the kingdom of heaven is not after death, but beyond illusion, that everything we have always sought already pulses within us, only waiting for us to have the courage to look within, traverse the darkness, and be reborn as light. While the official history was being written with blood, fire, and decrees, there were those who, far from the world's eyes, kept the flame of unspeakable knowledge alive. Men and women who knew that certain truths do not survive language, that they dissolve when transformed into discourse, and for this reason chose silence. But not a silence of omission. It was a living silence, loaded with presence, the same that envelops the interior of a temple when the soul recognizes itself before the eternal. These masters did not write gospels, they embodied them, and many of them drank from the same source that would have originated the Codex of Alexandria. They did not become religious leaders, nor did they seek followers. They lived on the margins, but radiated a wisdom that spanned centuries, like underground currents feeding hearts ready to remember. Plotinus was one of them, a Neoplatonic philosopher of the 3rd century, considered by many a direct heir to the spiritual tradition of Alexandria. He spoke of a supreme principle, the one, indescribable, beyond being and mind, the origin of all things. For him, humans could return to this source through a process of inner purification and silent contemplation. He did not speak of faith, but of the elevation of the soul. He did not view God as a judge, but as a presence. And even more, he recognized in humans the capacity to unite with the divine through direct experience. For Plotinus, the union with the One was ecstasy, not a concept. It was the end of separation. And although he never used the term cosmic Christ, his description of the soul illuminated by the ineffable light is deeply aligned with the archetype that this Christ represents. Another silent master was Origen, one of the earliest Christian theologians also trained in Alexandria. Later persecuted by the very church he helped to build, Origen dared to teach that the soul is eternal, that all beings, including fallen angels, will one day return to unity, and that hell was a transitional state, not an eternal punishment. He saw Christ as a universal principle of enlightenment, not as a historical exclusivity. He believed in apokatastasis, the restoration of all things, and asserted that every human being carries within them a spark that can, at some point, be awakened and reabsorbed into divine fullness. This teaching was considered too dangerous. His texts were censored, his disciples persecuted, his memory erased, but his words still echo in those who know how to listen. The Sufi tradition of Islam also preserved echoes of the cosmic Christ. Masters such as Rumi, Al-Hallaj, and Ibn Arabi spoke of the divine as an inner presence, an absolute love that inhabits the human heart. Al-Hallaj was executed for declaring, "I am the truth," a phrase that within the doctrine's context was equivalent to saying, "I am God." He did not speak out of arrogance, but out of the mystical realization that the awakened soul is one with the Absolute. This is the same perception that the lost gospel taught. The human being as a reflection of the eternal, not by merit, but by nature. These Sufis did not write dogmas. Their words were poetry, music, and ecstasy. They knew that spiritual truth is not communicated by argument, but by vibration. And so they spoke to the heart, not the mind. In medieval mystical Christianity, names like Meister Eckhart and Saint John of the Cross also resonated at this same frequency. Eckhart stated that the eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me, a radical assertion of unity between creature and creator. He spoke of a ground of the soul where there is no distinction between the human and the divine. Meanwhile, St. John of the Cross, in his Dark Night of the Soul, described the painful crossing of the ego towards union with the eternal beloved. They used the language of love and absence, of emptiness and presence, of the fertile darkness that precedes revelation. They did not speak of salvation through mediation, but of transformation through direct experience of the divine. And this is precisely what the cosmic Christ proposes, not blind faith, but vibrational fusion with eternal truth. Even in Buddhist tradition, particularly in Tibetan Dzogchen and Japanese Zen, we find the same essential teaching. The Buddha nature, the pure essence of the mind, is described as innate, present in all beings, immaculate, beyond time and space. Zen masters, when asked about God or ultimate truth, often remained silent or responded with gestures, paradoxes, or blows, not out of disrespect, but because they knew that truth is not revealed by words, but by direct perception. This stance is the same as the cosmic Christ, who does not explain, but reveals, who is not learned, but recognized, who is not a concept to be defended, but a presence to be lived. The silence of these masters was not empty. It was full. It was a vibrational field that transformed those who approached. Many of their disciples reported experiences of enlightenment not through speeches, but by being in their presence. And this brings us to the hidden content of the lost Gospel of Alexandria, a text that, according to the few accounts that have reached us, did not teach through logic, but through frequency. It did not explain Christ, but evoked his presence. It did not demand interpretation, but inner availability. It was more of a catalyst than a manual. Therefore, only those prepared could read it. Therefore, it was hidden, because it awakened, and awakening cannot be controlled. The lineage of the cosmic Christ did not perpetuate through clerics or institutions. It perpetuated through the vibrant silence of those who knew, those who saw the sacred in everything, who recognized the light even in the darkness, who understood that the temple is not made of stone, but of presence. These masters, over the centuries, kept an invisible tradition alive. They did not need sacred books, they were the book. Their lives were the living gospel. Their words, when spoken, were not doctrine, but loving provocation, and their deaths often were testimonies of the world's fear of true freedom. It's interesting to note that the quieter the master is, the more powerful his influence becomes. The less he seeks to teach, the more transformative his presence is. This happens because he has become a channel for Christ consciousness, which does not teach through arguments, but through vibration, and this vibration is recognized, not by the mind, but by the soul. The cosmic Christ does not need speeches. His mere presence dissolves lies. He is the fire that purifies without burning. He is the light that illuminates without hurting. He is the truth that liberates without imposing. He is the silence that speaks louder than all the screams in history. These masters knew that the world was not ready to accept a spirituality without walls, without hierarchies, without intermediaries. They knew that, to preserve the real, it had to be hidden, to keep it in gestures, in symbols, in silences. Not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. Because spiritual truth can only be given to those who are willing to die to the false, and most are not yet ready. Therefore, the cosmic Christ remains hidden, not because someone hides him, but because few truly seek him. But even so, it vibrates. It vibrates in the eyes of a silent master. It vibrates between the lines of forgotten texts. It vibrates in the quietness of a heart turning inward. It vibrates in the presence of those who live truthfully, even without knowing its name. It vibrates in the breath of eternity that transcends all times, all bodies, all traditions. The cosmic Christ is not coming. He has always been. And the masters who knew, even in silence, have always proclaimed him. The voice of the cosmic Christ does not resound from the pulpits, nor does it echo from the golden domes of temples. Its presence reveals itself subtly in the pauses between thoughts, in the silences that precede a true choice, in the moment when the soul, exhausted from illusions, turns inward and recognizes something that has always been there. The inner call does not come with sound, but with a deep impulse, with a restlessness that can no longer be ignored. It's as if a forgotten memory begins to awaken, as if the being, at last, recognizes that it was not born to survive, obey, or adapt, but to remember who it is. And this call, sacred, indivisible, absolute in its nature, is the very voice of the cosmic Christ, summoning each soul to become what it has always been, a living manifestation of the divine. Awakening this Christ consciousness is not a spectacular event. It's not a supernatural miracle, nor a mystical experience reserved for a select few. It's an internal process, deep, challenging, radically transformative. It's when the human being stops seeking God outside and begins to realize that the divine pulses in every breath, that eternity reveals itself in the present, and that the kingdom of heaven was never in another world, but hidden beneath layers of fear, guilt, belief, and conditioning. This awakening is the blooming of the soul, not by the imposition of doctrines, but by the dissolution of everything that is false. It's the most arduous and at the same time most glorious journey that any being can undertake. What we call Christ consciousness is not a concept, nor a heightened emotional state. It is an expanded perception of reality, where the sense of separation between the self and the whole is transcended. It is the birth of a new vision, where the other is no longer an enemy or stranger, but an inseparable part of oneself, where the suffering of the world is felt as one's own pain, where love ceases to be affection and becomes presence. Awakening this consciousness does not mean becoming a saint according to religious standards, but living with authenticity, wholeness, and clarity. It means embodying truth in every gesture, without the need for recognition, without the desire for approval. The awakened cosmic Christ does not seek followers. He invites to freedom. This journey begins, almost always, with a crisis, a rupture, a collapse of the old identity. That moment when nothing that previously made sense seems to have value, when the ground dissolves and everything you believed in unravels like mist. This is the dark night of the soul, the gateway to transformation. It's not punishment, it's an invitation. It's the beginning of the gestation of light. At this stage, the ego struggles, fears, resists. But little by little, through pain, doubt, and silence, something begins to emerge. A presence that observes everything without identifying with anything. This presence is the seed of the inner Christ, waiting for the right moment to bloom. Awakening is not about accumulating knowledge, it's about losing certainties. It's not about becoming more, but detaching from everything that was never real. The Christ consciousness does not settle in a mind full of theories, but in a heart devoid of pride. Therefore, the path is the opposite of what the world teaches. It's not about winning, but surrendering. It's not about conquering, but letting go. Letting go of masks, letting go of titles, letting go of the idea that one is separate from the source. Each layer that falls reveals more of the original light, and this light, which has always been there, is Christ himself, not the man, not the myth, but the eternal consciousness that resides in the innermost of all beings. There are practices that aid in this process, but none of them hold value if they're not accompanied by a genuine intention for self-transcendence. Silence is one of the greatest allies. Not the silence of the absence of noise, but the inner silence, where the mind ceases to shout and the heart can finally listen. Meditation, contemplation of nature, selfless service, conscious breathing, unconditional forgiveness. These are all tools that make room for the inner Christ to manifest. But the most powerful of all instruments is the willingness to look inward with brutal honesty, to see everything, including what one would prefer to keep hidden. Because the cosmic Christ can only inhabit where there is truth. As this awareness settles in, the perception of reality changes. The world is no longer seen as a place of threat, but as a mirror. Conflicts cease to be external battles and become internal reflections. The other ceases to be an adversary and becomes a mirror of one's own soul. Painful experiences reveal themselves as healing lessons. Duality dissolves and unity becomes visible, not by belief, but by direct experience. This is the key to Christ consciousness, the lived truth, not the thought one, the embodied love, not the declared one, the felt light, not the imagined one. And then true compassion arises, the kind that does not judge, does not categorize, does not divide. The compassion that is born from perceived unity. The awakened Christ does not see sinners, he sees sleeping brothers. He does not see enemies, he sees extensions of himself in different states of consciousness. Therefore, he does not condemn. He welcomes. He does not justify evil, but understands its origin in ignorance. And by understanding, he dissolves. Compassion is the action of Christ consciousness in the world. It heals without needing to touch. It transforms without needing to impose. It redeems without needing to convince. But awakening this consciousness comes at a price, and the price is everything that one believed to be. It's losing the world to gain the soul. It's dying in life to be reborn eternal. It's living in the world without being of the world. It's no longer belonging to any system, any ideology, any fixed identity. It's living as presence, as a channel of the divine. And this scares. That's why many retreat. They prefer the security of beliefs to the risk of truth. But those who dare to cross this portal discover a freedom that cannot be explained, a love that cannot be described, a peace that does not depend on circumstances. This transformation is not for the few, it is the destiny of all. Every human being is a potential Christ. Every soul is a universe in gestation. The forbidden gospel stated, according to preserved fragments, that the Son of Man is every form that remembers the light. This sentence sums it all up. Christ is not a man from the past. He is the presence that manifests whenever someone remembers who they are, whenever someone chooses the truth, whenever someone loves unconditionally. The awakening of Christ consciousness is not only possible, it is inevitable. It is the next evolutionary step for humanity. It will not be imposed. It will not be proclaimed by institutions. It will not come as a spectacle. It will come as it always has, in the silence of a heart that, tired of seeking outwardly, decides to return home. And upon entering itself, it finds there what it has always sought, the light that never went out, the presence that never left, the truth that never depended on belief. This is the cosmic Christ. This is the consciousness that transforms not only the individual, but the world. And this call is already sounding. And each soul that awakens is another trumpet announcing that the new era has already begun, not outside, but within. The return of Christ, long announced, awaited, feared, and interpreted through various theological lenses, will not happen in the heavens torn by trumpets, nor will it be preceded by cataclysmic events worthy of apocalyptic prophecies. He will not come riding on clouds or descending with a sword in hand to judge the living and the dead. The true return of the cosmic Christ occurs silently, invisible to distracted eyes, yet devastatingly real to those who feel the subtle vibration of consciousness being restored within the self. This return is internal, it's collective, it's vibrational. It does not manifest in a man, but in a humanity that awakens. It is not the return of a person, but of consciousness. It is not the beginning of a new religious reign, but the flowering of a new stage in the spiritual evolution of the human species. The cosmic Christ returns each time someone transcends the illusion of ego, each time a soul chooses love over fear, truth over convenience, presence over distraction, each time compassion triumphs over judgment, each time silence is more eloquent than rhetoric, each time someone sees themselves in another and recognizes their own light, there, in that instant, Christ reemerges. And this return is multiplying. It does not depend on religions, dogmas, messianisms. It spreads like a field of consciousness, like an invisible network of souls aligned with reality. It is this silent and irreversible movement that announces the true apocalypse, not as an end, but as a revelation. The revelation that the divine has never been absent, that the gospel has never been lost, that salvation has never been external. Across the globe, thousands of people, many of whom don't even know the name of this phenomenon, are awakening to a new perception of the world. They are abandoning blind materialism, questioning power structures, disillusioned with belief systems that promise but do not deliver. They are thirsting for authenticity, for depth, for reconnection with something greater, something that cannot be bought, manipulated, or controlled. This thirst is the call. This movement is the return. And although it may not yet make the headlines, it is happening in every corner of the world, in every inner silence, in every courageous choice to abandon the comfortable lie for the transformative truth. The return of the cosmic Christ is also the dissolution of false Christianity, the one that lost itself in power, that built empires on blood, that erected cathedrals on spiritual ruins, that strayed so far from the living Christ that today it would not recognize him if he returned in the form of a humble beggar or a questioning rebel. The returning Christ would not sit on thrones, nor would he accept worship. He would walk among the forgotten, converse with the marginalized, destroy the markets of faith as he once did, and invite each one to remember, the kingdom is within you. This is the Christ that returns, not to found another religion, but to dissolve them all, not to impose a new doctrine, but to resurrect the lost gospel, the one that speaks directly to the soul, without interpreters. With this return, the world also changes. The Christ consciousness, once activated in individuals, begins to radiate fields of coherence. New values emerge. The relationship with nature changes. The planet ceases to be a resource and becomes a temple. Life ceases to be a struggle for survival and becomes a celebration of existence. Others cease to be a threat and become a mirror. The economy, politics, science, everything begins to reorganize around a new foundation, unity. And this transformation will not be imposed by charismatic leaders nor by systemic reforms. It will occur because each awakened individual carries within them the seed of the new earth, an earth where Christ is not a memory, but a lived reality. The Codex of Alexandria, so sought after, so speculated about, so concealed, may never be found in its original form. But it has already fulfilled its role. It has sown seeds. It has kept the frequency alive. It has preserved, even if in fragments, the memory of what is possible. And now, with the return of the cosmic Christ, this lost gospel begins to be rewritten, not by scribes or religious authorities, but by ordinary human beings who, upon awakening to their true nature, become living pages of this eternal scripture. Each act of consciousness, each gesture of compassion, each gaze that looks beyond appearances, writes a new line of this gospel. Science, in turn, begins to find bridges with this new paradigm. Quantum physics, by revealing that consciousness can affect matter, that everything is interconnected, and that the observer influences the observed, approaches concepts previously reserved for mystics. Neuroscience explores altered states of perception, revealing that the human mind has potentials far beyond what was previously thought. Transpersonal psychology delves into experiences of unity, revealing that they are not delusions, but legitimate manifestations of higher states of consciousness. All of this confirms what the cosmic Christ has always taught, that the human being is a portal between the visible and the invisible, and that reality is not something fixed, but a field moldable by the vibration of consciousness. This convergence between spirituality and science is one of the clearest signs that the return is underway, and it cannot be stopped. Because it's not about belief, but vibration. Because it doesn't depend on institutions, but on frequency. Because it's not led by someone, but by everyone. And in this sense, the return of the cosmic Christ is also the return of the lost Alexandria, not as a city, but as a state of consciousness, an inner space where all knowledge meets, where all traditions converge, where knowledge does not divide, but unifies. This is the new temple. This is the new gospel. This is the new world. And it is being built now in silence, amidst the chaos, in the darkness that precedes the dawn. It is being woven by those who refuse to live numbed, who chose to feel, to question, to remember, by those who abandoned certainties to live the truth, by those who died to the world and were reborn to the eternal, by those who, when looking into the eyes of another, recognize Christ, not as a legend, but as a real presence. These are the builders of the new age. These are the evangelists of the new era. These are the children of the return. The cosmic Christ no longer needs to return. He has already returned. He lives in every awakening. He vibrates in every being who chooses the light. He manifests in every act of real love. He reveals himself in every soul that breaks through the veil of illusion. He is eternity finding itself again in time. And nothing, absolutely nothing, can stop this return. Because it does not depend on the world. He is prior to the world. He is the light that, even erased from history, continues to shine in secret, waiting only for the right eyes to open to see it. And these eyes are already opening, in silence, in many, in all. And now, mind unfettered, I want to hear you. If this lost gospel still lives in fragments within us, which part of it do you feel is awakening in your life today? Comment below, what within you already resonates with this Christ consciousness? Let's manifest this return together, because when one mind awakens, it illuminates thousands around it. The more we share our memories, the quicker we rebuild the new Alexandria within each of us. And don't stop here. Tap now on the video that's appearing on your screen. The Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. There, you will discover what few know, the 33 coded steps that reveal the secret route left by Jesus to achieve real enlightenment, and how each step guides us to our deepest awakening. See you there, mind unfettered.